So for the longest time, bond market has been the most secure way of investing money.
It all becomes very, very clear.
What do you think will happen with the current state of the economy in the United States, combined with your views on politics that is happening in the United States at the moment?
When rates go down, home prices can't go up. Who's paying $4,000 for a one bedroom? Because, in New York, they pay $8,000.
Today's economic market, the consumer is just starting to tap into their credit card.
3 questions that we need to answer today. Who are the losers? Who could be the losers and how to prevent that? And what are they losing?
And so a lot of people are getting pushed to the back hump. And then a few people are getting pushed towards the upper hump. And what that gives you is this valley in the middle.
Best investment right now is to sit on your cash.
So let's introduce ourselves. I work in a mortgage company as an account executive. I help people understand how the mortgages work. I have passion, I'm pretty passionate about what's happening in the world, and I'm very curious and very excited and anxious. And I listen to people who are smarter than me, and hopefully, starting from this point, I'll be having a chance to meet people as smart as you guys, to ask you questions and see how I should prepare and if I should prepare. Today's agenda is very simple. We'll go to that. We'll get to that after we'll introduce ourselves. So let's go ahead, Hovik.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Vasily, for having me. My name is Hovik Kachadurian, and my last name is as kind of hard as Vasily's, I guess. Being an Armenian last name, we got the whole alphabet in there. But I work with Vasily at LBC Mortgage. I'm a sales trainer and a manager there. I do underwriting. I've been in the business for over 25 years. I've seen most of the angles of the business, from the retail, wholesale, escrow, secondary marketing, and also, I guess when you're around that long, you are able to see certain parts of the industry. So I started my career in the subprime back in 1993, I believe. So it progressed. I worked for a bunch of Wall Street firms, unfortunately. One of them is no longer around, Lehman Brothers. So that's where I am right now. My passion is, I do love mortgages, and I'm a day trader as well. So I get up in the morning, I do my day trading, and then 9 o'clock I put my mortgage hat on. So that's me.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Victor?
All right. So my name is Victor On. I got a very simple last name. I've been in the real estate industry for probably about 12 years now. I got in college my last year, kind of out of panic, which ended up working out. Started in commercial, built a team, took an office over a Keller Williams franchise in 2000, I think it was like 17, 18. Took the Brentwood office over, and then I was poached by the Pasadena office, became a managing partner there, kind of looked at the books from the brokerage model, realized there wasn't really much money in it. So I kind of just took the ego hat off, and I was like, I don't really want to continue this risk. And then about a year later, Coldwell Banker in Calabasas, they reached out to me. And I was a little hesitant to go more on the corporate side, but that office is probably out of the United States that they own, probably top 10 in volume. So I was like, look, I'll go in, see what the inner workings are like. And then during that whole last 4 years, I do own a data company for real estate. So it connects homeowners with their personal information, and we're just streamlining it for.
What's the name of it?
It's called Real Cloud.
There we go.
Yeah. So it's been a very interesting journey going into the data world, which I think is what stemmed my interest in just people interacting with each other and looking at people more from a data set than from more of a, I guess, consumer experience. So
cool.
Thank you very much, Victor. JP, your turn.
Sure. So let's see. I'm Juan Farah. Last name is probably in the simpler side, since we're all doing the last name thing here. I guess I would describe myself mostly as a macroeconomist. I've always been around that sphere. I've worked at Goldman in sort of the warehouse lending part. So as far as it relates to, your backgrounds, guys, I would grab, not me, the front desk would grab a bunch of mortgages, put them in a warehouse line. I managed risk, I managed the lending, so I leveraged them so they could build, mortgage-backed securities essentially, or CLOs, things of that nature. The piping that gets more liquidity into the system so you can keep lending essentially. After that, I was at the International Monetary Fund, macro analyst there, focused on research-rich countries. So I have dealt a lot with countries that produce oil and gas, mining goods, other things. But generally speaking, I am now a graduate student at Harvard, where I do law and economics. I do the intersection of law and macro finance, if you will. I focus a lot on crisis. I do all manner of financial crisis. Is sort of my area of expertise. And actually, I served recently at the World Bank's chief economist office, focused on that sort of crisis prevention and research on that front. So, if I can be helpful with any macro views, that's what I'm here for, I guess.
So I would say it's pretty self-explanatory why I brought three of you guys here. You have three different perspectives, points of views on what's currently happening. The most important part for me is that you have not only different points of views, but different feeling about how it's going to happen, what's going to happen, and how we should prepare, if we should prepare, and we will be probably talking about this most. So the first question, we'll start with Hovig. What do you think? Let's ask this question. For an average person who's going to be listening this first time, I'm pretty sure that those are not going to be financial analysts at first. What is the bond market and how is it affecting our lives?
What is the bond market and how is it affecting our
Briefly,
lives?
yes.
Briefly. I just want to put since we're talking about the bond market and you mentioned that I trade, I just want to put a disclaimer out there that, whatever we talk here, it's not for trading purposes, it's for educational purposes only. So saying that the bond market is basically the American government's way of bringing in money, their financial security. And, any consumer, any institution could go in and buy the bond market, to buy the notes, and the bond market is an instrument, basically pays you a fixed amount. It's a fixed asset. So let's say you're buying a $10,000 bond, it's going to pay you at let's say 5% interest over the life of that bond. And so you get the yield of the bond and the interest rate. So it's a fixed asset secured by the United States government. Now, there are bonds that are secured by other institutions, but the majority of it is secured by, when we talk about the bond market, most everybody thinks about the U.S. securities market. I mean, U.S. The 30-year bond, the 10-year note, the 5-year note, or the short-term notes too. So the bond market, if the interest rate and the price of the bond affects on the daily consumer, and unfortunately, the daily consumer doesn't have that information or is not knowledgeable enough to make that decision to know how those markets are affecting them. Like, for example, when the price of the bond market drops, as it's been doing for the last 27 months, the interest rates have been raising steadily. So knowing this information, you would have prepared as a regular consumer,
Right.
You would have prepared yourself. So that's, in general, it's a nutshell, that's the bond market. It does affect every American lives. And so it views that everybody should understand and learn a little bit about the bond market.
So for the longest time, bond market has been the most secure way of investing money. At least it was paying off the inflation and saving people from the inflation, and it's probably the safest way into. I'm hearing opinions there. So, JP, please elaborate on that.
No, so actually, yeah, I like Horvik. I like your description. I would just maybe elaborate a little bit on a couple of points and maybe throw a different way of understanding the bond market. So as Horvik said, very much agreed. The bond market is dominated at the end of the day by U.S. debt, right? So whatever bonds. So first thing that I think any sort of layperson needs to know about the bond market or about what a bond is is if I'm going to borrow money from, say, Vasily or Horvik or Victor, I go to them, they give me money, they get a piece of paper that says, I owe you whatever. If they then turn around, break that piece of paper and say 10 pieces, and they sell them off to other people, I now owe those people, and that has become a bond. That is literally how a bond works. That is how it sort of started back in the 1700s in England. So that's sort of part one, I think, just to add some color and some like physicality, tangibility to the concept of a bond. The complementary view I want to give you about, what the bond market does. I want to propose to you that you think about debt as a way to bring money from the future to the present. And so economists often think about debt as an intertemporal substitution mechanism, meaning I'm going to substitute consumption or shit that I'm going to buy later for shit that I want to buy today. And so that's exactly what the US government is doing. And I propose to you that if you think about that definition for 1 second, it all becomes very, very clear, because then the interest rate becomes the price of money today. And so you can start thinking about interest rates as the price of money. And if the biggest user of money, as Horvik was saying, which is the US government, user and issuer, which is an interesting position to be in, is raising the price of money, what the heck does that mean to you, consumer? Like if the US has to pay more money today for money from tomorrow, then what does that mean to you? That means that your price is going to raise not by an equal amount, but perhaps by a factor of 2 from that. So I guess that's the other chunk. And Vasily, you were saying one thing where I started sort of shaking my head. Yes, by and large, it's sort of been overinflation. That's when you hear Bloomberg people talking about the real rates being positive. But in times of extreme indebtedness, there's several governments. Yes, there's several governments, not only the US, that use negative real rates. I mean, look at Europe to deflate the debt. And so that's a phenomenon that and you can use several levers to do that, but that's a phenomenon that is largely understood as financial repression, because you can also like go and force your local financial institutions to hold more bonds. And so by definition, forcing them to lend you money as the government, things of that nature. So by and large, I agree. I just wanted to caveat that, yes, it is traditionally the safe asset. That's why it is the base, the cornerstone of the financial system. But it's not always true that it pays over inflation. That's all I wanted to say. Sometimes you get the short end of the stick, for sure.
I think most of the time.
Yeah. So exactly. So exactly about this point, most of the time, what is, in your opinion, Victor, because I already know that you have a couple of views on that point. What is currently happening from the business side, and what do you think is caused that, and what do you think will happen with the current state of the economy in the United States, combined with your views on politics that is happening in the United States at the moment?
Okay. Well, so maybe before I answer that question, I'll give you a depth of kind of how I came to this conclusion. And this conclusion was back probably in 2015. Oh, sorry, 2015. I had a few very large clients that have become close friends that brought up a company in China called Evergrande. And that's back in 2015. And they said, this isn't fantastic. And I asked them, I was like, how does the business model work? They go, oh, it's great. So they laid out the whole financing piece. And, this is obviously probably another topic to go into on its own. But, the financial makeup of China is you don't actually ever own the land. It's a lease. So to me, I found this completely bizarre, because land leases, investors just historically will never touch here.
All right.
Because there's no value in the ownership. So when I saw that and I went into the financing piece of the government and how the developers make money and how you put a deposit. And then there's a social status where, as a man, if you don't own a home, then you're a secondary citizen and you're not deemed a worthy male to want to have a family with. So I got into that in 2015. Then started studying the social aspect of it. And then I came back into the world I live in. So I grew up from a very blue collar family. So I had to kind of understand that the credit card was going to be dangerous if out of control. So based on that, and my peers growing up throughout the last I'm 34, so that's 15 years. Let's say 18 years of my adult life. Let's say actually being an adult. I realized that everyone put everything on credit, but I never knew how bad it was until I got into real estate. When in 2015-16, we just came out of a recession. Clients that lost all their assets were rebuying. Clients that made it were rebuying, right? And it got to a point where people were just buying because the interest rates were low. And it kept getting lower, so it was fueling more real estate purchases in the hopes that the rents never go down.
Yeah.
Right? So now we're at historically in this as we're
Which technically is true.
Yeah, it's true. However, when rates go down, right? Obviously it stimulates everything, everything's good. However,
Rents don't.
home prices can't go up as the same way the rent prices go up. One has to give. But this time nothing gave. So that's when I knew, oh, this is bad. Right? How is this possible? Because I don't care how many beautiful, I have a good client of mine who built a 300 unit in Glendale. And we were doing pro forma rents in 2018. And he said, oh, don't worry, we'll get $4,000 for a one bedroom. And I was like, what? Who's paying $4,000 for a one bedroom? He goes, oh, in New York, they pay $8,000. And I was like, yeah, but there's only so many. So even the most, and I try to surround myself with everybody who's wealthier and smart, right? So I can always just sit there and be a fly in the wall and listen, right? So when they were telling me this, I was like, okay, maybe I have something wrong. Because these guys are worth $100, $200, $300 million minimum. So I was like, okay, maybe. But then I looked at their balance sheet. Most of it's debt. So I was like, oh my God, if one of these assets don't perform, they're going to lose 4 or 5. So now looking at it from a consumer standpoint, and obviously on my Instagram, I'm very opinionated on what I say. It's really because I feel bad about what's going to happen, right? The fact that, and I look at everyday consumption, and it's been a weird thing where I always found buying breakfast in the morning was kind of the biggest waste of money, right? Because you, as an everyday person, breakfast, you could make it home for a couple bucks. Last 4 to 7 years, maybe, you can't go get breakfast for 2 people for under $50, $60, right? So if you look at something so simple as your first meal of the day, everything throughout the day is going to get exponentially more expensive, right? So now looking forward that the money printing has stopped, which I kept warning people, this whole money printing that we did, 40% in the last 2 years, everyone pretty much just disregarded it.
Yeah.
Right. And so now I'm at the point where, I've been saying this since probably 17, when they were supposed to pull the money back on the QE, right? They were supposed to stop buying the mortgages back. Again, they didn't happen. We're going to pay for what we did the last 12 years, 14 years, maybe, because we never fixed the last problem. We printed our way out of it. The problem is the everyday citizen has no idea what's about to happen, because we're now at a point where it's like every fat lady, whatever, every fat lady's out there and they're singing.
We can edit it.
You can edit that. Everything out there is about to, it's at its boiling point. The bond market, the stock market, the FTX that just happened. And it was just one of those things where I was waiting for one big catalyst. The last couple of years, that's all I was waiting for. And this is going to be, Lehman 10.0, in my opinion, based on the amount of exposure, and then looking into the real estate market that's going to crash. In my opinion, wholeheartedly, way worse than 2008.
I'm going to stop you there. JP, what is your opinion on that? Because
I have some thoughts, and frankly, they largely align with Victor's. Sort of the over leverage of the system is really worrying. Not just because it's the United States. And when you take the global view, everybody did the same thing.
Yep.
And just to sort of make an aside point, and this is something that really boils my blood, but both crypto and sort of more philosophically, this, frankly, I'm sorry, I'm going to call them this, but the crazies that believe in MMT, modern monetary theory. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this group of
If you can, please elaborate.
fantastic
Like, give 30
thinking.
seconds to explain what
So
is it.
basically, they think that you can always print more money and just give it away to solve pretty much any problem, so long as you're not operating over something called potential GDP, which is something like you live in this fantastic world. When you're a macroeconomist, you live in this voodoo world. I will admit, as a macroeconomist, most of what we do is voodoo. It's just voodoo dolls and talking crap. Like my dad always jokes that economists, and that obviously includes me, spend half their life trying to predict what's going to happen next, and the other half trying to explain what they predicted did not happen. So yeah, that sort of boils my life down. But in any case, the MMT people, they sort of say, listen, there's no point in trying to be so austere, or no point in trying to respect sort of the morality that you inherently have. Allow me to do a long arc on this one. But like you know that when you borrow money, it's sort of like your money that you borrowed, and you must morally pay it back. And so they found a way around this sort of moral imperative by saying, no, we don't need to like respect any sort of basic rules of morality when it comes to borrowing money. We can just print it out, so long, only one condition, so long as you're not operating over potential GDP. And I realize I did not explain what that is. So macroeconomists often will calculate some sort of like threshold, upper threshold, ceiling potential GDP at which the economy could be operating, given its capital stock and labor and sort of your endowments. You're an economy like the US, you have 1,000 factories, 300 satellites, this, that, and 300 million people, and so you should be operating around here. So they say, oh, you can print your way to get there. If you print more than that, you'll get inflation. The problem is that number, that potential GDP, again, is nobody knows it. Nobody knows.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Did I understand it correctly? It's a imaginary number, imaginary variable that is being put into a very real life equation.
Yeah, the problem is that they assume that this thing is actually calculable, if you ask me. And so the standard becomes inapplicable, because what it does is it gives you permission to print money ad nauseum. I'm Venezuelan. I know what printing money does. It causes hyperinflation. Like the way I think about it is,
Maduro coin.
Oh God, the petro and all that junk. It's ridiculous. In any case, the way I think about it when it comes to like monetary policy and the value of your money, I think it's obviously all about trust. But some countries, you have sort of a buffer in terms of like real things. Like people will look at your economy and say you produce this much, and your capacity of repayment is X, and you have this many international reserves. And then on top of that, you have some sort of intangible, like on a balance sheet, to sort of Victor's point, goodwill, that is sort of like the trust that people have in you paying back your stuff. And the reality is that that's exhaustible too. You can exhaust that if you overdo it. And I guess if I were to paraphrase to my understanding of Victor's point, is we are dangerously close of running out of goodwill in terms of like the value of the dollar and how much people care about this. But I want to punt it to Horvik, because I think the day-to-day market reactions have been swinging wildly lately.
Definitely.
And as somebody who like observes markets closely, and what I find marvelous about this is I often live in my satellite little world, but it seems like we have the three levels here, right? Like Victor is super close to the action, and Horvik is super close to the action, but one level removed in the sense that he's in markets.
It's Hovig.
So Horvik, sorry.
H-O-V-I-G, Hovig.
Hovig. I'm so sorry, I've been mispronouncing it.
You're the third person today. That's okay.
I know a lot of Hoviks too, so that's why.
I now need to make sure that a lot more people mispronounce it, so I'm not the last. I need to make sure a lot more people mispronounce it, so I'm not the last.
All right, so Hovig, so guys, correct me if I'm wrong. Right now, Victor and I would say Victor's opinion is that the tsunami is already here. We're just pretending it's not here. JP's point of view is that we're really close. We see the tsunami. We could be underwater very, very soon, very quick.
We could be, but I will give a little probability that we can manage a soft landing. I will,
which is if you will feel still okay to hang on to that, because I want you to elaborate on that point of view as well. What is your opinion on that? Where are we at in front of the tsunami? How big is the tsunami? How to prepare? Are we going to survive?
Before I start to that
Yes.
conversation, I want to add a couple of things to what Victor and JP said in regards to debt and in regards to what happened in 2009, and just bring it to today's word. I'm totally in agreement with both of you when it comes to debt, to credit card debts. I think credit card debts and debt in general is a negative thing on the consumer and the economy, because the consumer doesn't usually use debt intelligently.
Yeah.
Debt was created to be used for a purpose.
But it's a stimulus for economy. Come on.
No, it is, but it becomes a negative after there's a threshold, and most people do pass that threshold. And let's keep that in mind for a second, and let's go back to 2008 during the Lehman issue. 2007, 2008, I used to work for Lehman Brothers. And my background is also I'm an accountant by education. So I'm a freak. At one point, I used to have probably 400 or 500 annual reports in my bedroom in paper format. Not back then, there was no internet.
No,
So-
there's no control Fing that. Yeah? It's not just finding what you need.
Yeah, right.
I just need the bottom line. I don't know what's in between.
There is no removable trail.
So I used to love reading the financials of the markets. That's what I'm getting to. So in 2008, we had a meeting with the Lehman Brothers economist. And I remember I used to rent a house in Hermosa Beach. And these people were talking about, everything is good, but at the same time, they are holding billions of dollars of mortgage pools that they cannot sell. So I started doing some research and looked at their financials, and I told my boss the next couple of days, I'm looking at their financials. Besides debts and goodwill and paper money, I don't see any assets. And this is a 150-year-old company. They don't even have a freaking building in New York.
So you noticed that even then, when you were working, were there anyone
Yes.
besides you who was noticing that?
I don't think so.
Wow.
So I remember my lease was coming up to be, because I was renting that place. It was May. And I said, you know what, given where the market is headed, I'm not going to, because I had a house in the valley as well. So I did not renew my lease because I wanted to cut back my expenses.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, Lehman Brothers was massively in debt, and in 2008, besides the Lehman Brothers, the consumer were massively in debt. So let's fast forward to today's environment where we are. We've been talking about this in our office in terms of when is the time where the market is going to collapse. I think the consumer is just in today's society, in today's economic market, the consumer is just starting to tap into their credit cards. They do have, let's say, on a scale of 1 to 10, the last several years, if consumer spending was about, on a credit card, let's say about 2, the last 6 months, that 2 has gone up to 4. It has been doubled. So, and it hasn't gone to the point where it's gone to the 8 and 9 and 10 that it's going to explode yet.
On average, you mean, like on the average for everybody?
On average for everybody, yes. I mean, we will be getting there. And I think we still have 6 to 12 months to get there, So now that part, it definitely will explode. We will see more bankruptcies. We will see more foreclosures, but will it be in the same level as 2008? I don't believe it will. So given there are certain things, and we can talk about that later.
Yes, we will. Please.
There are certain factors, I actually wrote that down, that they will not. Now, the other thing because JP was asking about the bond market, one of my bond market predictions was, do you want me to get into that?
Yes,
now?
please.
I've always said we should have a low of the bond prices in October of 2022, specifically October 18 of 2002. The low of the bond market came in on October 21. which was Friday.
Mm.
So just a couple of days. And then if you guys look at the bond market prices, it started rallying up the last couple of weeks. Okay. So there's some kind of reversal is happening. Now, do I think it's a long-term reversal? I don't, because I think the bond market still has room to go further down the prices. But right now, where we are in terms of the bond prices, it's what's affecting the economy right now is in terms of inflation and people's savings. If you look at the market, the savings rate right now, the banks have or started paying 3% on your savings. So that's and the bond yield is 4% on average. So I think the bond yield, it's going to go to 6%, and that's where it's going to top if it goes there. I could be wrong there, but I was predicting the October low at 108, bond prices at 108.
Because it creates, sorry for interrupting. So it creates incentives for people to buy the
Of
bond.
course,
Yeah.
when the bond market it's at 6% yield, the price is the price is going to be around 101 and 102. That's
Hovig, Vasily, just maybe for the listeners, just maybe good to clarify that yields and prices of bonds move inversely to each other.
Inverse relationship, yes.
So if the price goes down, the yield goes up. Just to clarify that for the listeners.
That's why when the price of bond goes down, further down, that means the yield is going to be going higher, and it's going to be more attractive to the consumer. I say consumer, but I should mostly say to the institutional market, because the consumer, 99% of the consumer,
everybody's in crypto.
They have no idea about the bond market, which is the safest market, but they know a lot about crypto.
Yes.
So I'm a big crypto negative person. I mean, I'm against cryptos. So
same here.
I'm so surprised, guys.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's I think that's because of the yield and because of we haven't seen the credit card maximization yet. I don't see huge catastrophe, and there's other reasons I'll give you guys later too. So, and hope I'm making sense in terms of
absolutely.
Perfect sense. I mean, so look, let me add on to that. Well, you brought up a great point, JP, the whole moral aspect of paying your debt back. I also looked at how the credit score affects the everyday citizen. So it's going to come to a point where we're at such a cap level of spending that people are just not going to care about their credit score, right? Because at the end of the day, who cares about your credit score if you're just trying to put food on the table?
Yeah.
So that's, I think, kind of the limit that society is going to come to. Back to your point on 2008. So this is a one point that I have kind of stayed firm and argued with a lot of industry professionals that have way more experience than I do. But the way I'm looking at it is, in 2008, it was catastrophic because it all kind of adjusted at once, more or less, right? All the rates kind of shot up and nobody could afford pretty much anything, kind of. But they kind of fixed it pretty quickly. This time around, everyone is pretty much on 30-year fixed debt. I think there is a 20% or less that's on an adjustable in the United States. Yeah. However, from the macro standpoint, we are entangled so deeply with Canada's mortgages, but with Canada's mortgages, they're about 50% in adjustable. So on a macro level, I think there's a bigger picture that we're going to have to worry about. But from the affordability standpoint, right, everyone has a pot that they go out, they twiddle their thumbs, whatever, they make the money, they bring it back home. That savings, and that if your job gets, let's say your $100,000 salary goes to 70, right, and your wife's $100,000 salary goes to 70, your now sustainability is not possible for as long as it was before. Now, that's not even factoring in inflation, but let's say that formula changes. This is the what I always say, because my office in Calabasas, 3% on a $3 million mortgage is still 3% on a $3 million mortgage, right? I've seen the most sophisticated investors leverage up and take on more debt on their primary residence than I've seen in my entire life. Granted, I haven't been that life long enough, But I'm looking at it from what I've seen, and they're like, "Oh, don't worry, it's only 3%." And I was thinking to a point, "Well, geez, it is only 3%." But, and I'm looking at their income, like, well, you've never made more than 500,000 a year, right? And that's kind of your floating average throughout the entire lifestyle. So, yeah, that's great, but you have a high risk industry. So you have an XYZ in a tech field where your job is not really defined, or it's actually not even needed. So I'm seeing a lot of those. So my whole thing is, once one person loses a job or there's a huge salary reduction in the entire household, they're going to now say, oh, well, how long can I afford this lifestyle, and not panic when I see homes coming on the market 50,000 less, 100,000 less, $150,000 less. That's in California, right? So if you go to Arizona and all the other smaller states, it's already happened, right? So now it's a
So in
panic.
California, you have not seen this yet? The
Oh
price
no, it's
reductions?
already happened. It's turned.
happening. It
So
is.
Okay.
the little like background on, I run a Calabasas office, Coldwell Banker. We do about $1 billion in sales a year with about 160 agents.
It's a real sole brokerage.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
brokerage.
I know.
So-
Yeah. Oh, good.
So I get to see the macro data points, right? Because from the managerial standpoint, they give me everything. So I looked at days on market, and this is back in February last year. My rates were still 3s, and they're like, "Where do you see rates going?" I was like, "At the end of the year, 2021, between 4 to 6, depending on how crazy the Feds go." And they were like, "No way." And I was like, "Oh, okay, it's fine. I'm not going to argue the point, right? It's just a matter of how much more money can we print." And they were like, "Well, what about next year?" And I was like, "Well," and this one I kind of threw out there historically speaking. I was like, "We're going to be in some sort of war this year." And they're like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "Well, historically speaking, war is to go get resources, and it's also to distract the people and also to create some camaraderie. So I think next year we're going to need something to distract from what's really going on." So that's kind of where, and I didn't want to go too much into it, but I said that, and rates will be in the 7 to 10s by the end of the year. And they were like, "No way," right? The days on market has, from January of this year, in all of LA County, and I like to use LA County as kind of as a marquee, right? Because it has its blue collar and it has its as white collar as they come.
Mm-hmm.
About 400% days on market increase, right? Price reductions, and my prediction has changed a little bit from January till now, but this year, January, I said 1 to 3% bleed every month on home values. Now I see minimum 2 to 4% bleed every month, right? Because there's just going to be less homes to sell. And then when they do come out, they're going to be more desperate.
Okay.
Right. So that's going to have to happen till, eventually the affordability of the buyer finds it worthwhile to re-enter the home market. But they're also fighting this inflation, which I don't see getting better anytime soon, to justify paying a 12% mortgage. I'll pay 12% if, $1 million home is 600,000, 500,000,
Mhm.
but I'm not going to pay 12% on $1 million home for like 800,000. Right. So I think with this kind of timeline, which again, it's better that it happens this way. And I was a big advocate of, in 2018, if they just raised the interest rate like a quarter point every 6 months or so, I think we would have been fine. Right.
But they started doing it, right? By 2019, I think we were at the Fed funds rate was at around 3.25. Hovik, I don't know if you were following this at the time, but I don't know if you remember.
He was.
But they had started, yeah.
I usually don't follow the Fed market rate, honestly. I just basically follow the bond market.
Yeah.
I have to look at my charts to tell you guys, but
All good, but yeah.
No, but end of 18, they said they were going to raise it, and then that's when they had the QE talk, and then the market, there was like that flash crash where it completely went berserk, and then they said, "Oh no, never mind, we're not going to do this anymore," and they kept the rates low, and I was like, "Oh, so technically I was right, but I was wrong because they kept printing."
They decided not to.
They were like, "Just kidding," and I was like, "Oh man, had I known, I would have short." But again, I didn't know. So now moving forward, they didn't really raise the rates from 18. I mean, It is almost nothing, right? And then the little that they raised, they dropped it all back down when COVID happened.
Now it's panic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now they're panicking.
Yeah. And then so now when COVID happened, I was like, oh, wow, another reason to print money, which is panic. And again, I don't know where you guys all stand on the whatever the COVID situation. But I
there's a second part that's not going to be on
oh,
the show.
okay, so I won't.
Can I add a couple of things
Yeah,
on
yes,
what you're
please.
saying? I mean, I agree with Victor in terms of the values. We haven't seen the bottom yet on the real estate. And you use the word desperate. And in our office, I've been telling everybody that going forward the next 12 months, keep that word in mind, because every consumer that calls you they're going to be in a state of desperation. The decisions they're going to be making is out of desperation. So your sales perspective is going to be coming from that end too. So everybody's going to be a state of desperation. We haven't hit that point yet. We are getting so we haven't seen the bottom yet. We still have 15 to 20% to go, if not more, in certain areas. And in terms of you mentioned about the people's income. I mean, I wrote a bunch of downs before coming here. I mean, who are the losers in this economy?
This is probably the most important question. The three questions that we need to answer today: who are the losers? Who could be the losers, and how to prevent that? And what are they losing?
Okay.
So I'll answer, and I'll write down what I wrote actually before. I wanted to kind of. I mean, the answer. I mean, to this, who are the loser? I said the answer is simple. The poor and the people with fixed income are the biggest losers in an inflationary economy. Okay. Most middle class are on fixed income, so they are going to be losers, unfortunately. Okay. Their paycheck, the inflation went up 15-20%. Some places even more, up to 50%. There are certain things are 50% higher today than about a year ago, if not even like more. 6 months ago. So, but the paychecks did not go up that much, and they're fixed. So those people are definitely going to be hurt, So in terms of, and you also mentioned, so let's take the poor and the middle class. So what's going to happen for these people, in order for them to survive, there's going to be migration going on from certain parts of the country to another parts. Like, for example, we can see just taking California alone, a lot of people are going to be moving out of LA County to, let's say, Temecula Valley, or
out of state,
or out of that's why I said just California. I mean, out of a state, it's a huge thing.
Which is more and more common and easier to do now.
Right now, one of the reasons North Carolina is becoming very attractive is because of the house prices, the affordability. So we're going to be seeing the migration of the population, and that's going to happen within the middle class. The poor, they're not going to be able to do it. The middle class is going to be able to.
Very fair point.
Yep.
Very fair point.
And the last, in terms of the winners, we all know the answer. I mean, of course, always the people with money are winners, because the rich people do know how to leverage the money and how to utilize their money. I just give you guys two examples. I have two friends that I advise them in terms of some of their investments in the real estate and the stock market. They have over $1 million in their accounts, and with the inflation being, the $1 million right now, it's buying, $950,000 worth of items, let's say. But given with what the bond market is paying right now and what their interest rate is on the savings, they could extend that, minimize that $50,000 loss from inflation to, let's say, to $30,000. So the rich, again, the effect on the rich of the inflation on the rich people, it's not 15, 20, 30%. It's less. The inflation on the poor people, it's exponential. So
I'd love to actually hear JP's on this, because I mean, I agree with pretty much everything he said. Just the only thing is, it's just like, and the reason I want to say this first is I want to hear this, because I've been hearing the last maybe 4 or 5 years, like, cash is trash, right? If it's the cash isn't being in the market or whatever, and I'm mind blown, because I got into the real estate in the recession, and cash was king, and I've always known that cash is king.
I
Right.
actually wrote someplace here.
Oh, yes, that's
Cash
why
is
I was
king.
trying. Yeah,
Cash is king.
right?
So
I think we all agree on
so,
that.
yeah. So
So I've had that hoarding mindset. So have I missed a lot of opportunities? 100%. But I was always taught cash is king. And when people were saying, "Oh, inflation, it's going to eat up, $5 million in the bank account," right? And you know, let's say there's a 30% inflation to your real purchase, and I think it's 15's a little light, but I'd say if you look at your day-to-day lifestyle, it's probably 30% easy. Food,
easy.
gas, whatever. And but everyone goes, "Oh, I gotta use it, or I'm gonna lose money on inflation." And I just say, well, just don't spend as much, because as inflation destroys the economy, that cash of $5 million is probably now worth $15 million. Because if you just buy one real estate asset that went from, I don't know, $2 million to now it's $1 million, right? Long term, it's going to come back. So that's kind of where, I kind of wanted to hear your aspect on it, because from a macro, perspective, it makes to me the most sense, right? If you're not sophisticated enough, and I look at myself as simply as I can invest, right? What can I do with my cash? And my whole thing is I can only control what goes out and essentially what comes in, depending on the market and how I can, hedge against it. This time around, I just think the crash is going to destroy the middle class. I don't really think there's much of a middle class left. And the middle class that are left, I think are going to graduate to the upper class, because they saw this coming. And then the ones that were just kind of, oh, I'm so smart, I make so much money, whatever, selling even like branded t-shirts, people were making millions a year, right? But that's because money was free. Now that I feel like people that have reached a certain middle class status, inherently in the next few years, everyone's going to be poor, right? And I just don't feel like there's just not much. And I hate to sound pessimistic, but people will get through it once the challenges are in front of them. But I feel like there's a very, very slim majority actually come out of this well, because I think this is going to be like and I've been saying this 1970s hyperinflation with like a 20s depression combo. So
we are in 1970s hyperinflation for that's, but in terms of 20% depression type of that part, I'm kind of I don't see that on my end.
So
let's hear.
I want to hear the macro side.
Sure. So on the cash is king, cash is trash, I think we flipped the paradigm to cash is king again. And I really like Victor's point, because I guess I hadn't thought about it in this way. I'm so used to thinking about the sophisticated investor and what the institutionals do, and they're sophisticated. So like, maybe cash is king as a parsimonious, as a heuristic piece of advice doesn't necessarily apply to them. But when you take it to the regular person, even like you, me, I think that makes a lot of sense, that you would want to keep a stance over the long run that cash is king, because it's an opportunistic stance, which is what Victor is saying, right? Like, sure, maybe for 10 years, I'm losing a little bit of money every year, but when shit goes south, I'm ready to take advantage.
Yep.
And then over the long run, that's what it is about. And I think that, another sort of shorthand adage, whatever I've always heard, is getting rich is not about making money, it's about not losing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is one of those moments. Let me get back to sort of who I think are winners, who I think are losers. I also like Victor's point. I'm just gonna sort of, I guess, I tend to think in math, so forgive me the whole like statistics thing, but I guess what we're seeing is, are you guys all familiar with the concept of like a normal distribution, right? Like it looks like a bell kind of thing.
If you could please elaborate.
Yeah, so a normal distribution in statistics, you sort of start with a little bit of people on the bottom end, say very little income, the poor. And then like you see a curve, if you saw a graph, it starts rising, and then you get sort of a middle class that is a hump. It looks like a camel's hump. And then as you move into higher levels of income, and then it thins out again, right? But I think what Victor is saying, and I would agree, and I will elaborate on why I think that is beyond the current crisis. I think the current crisis is just a manifestation of a confluence of factors that I'd like to talk through. But what you see is that if you saw a camel with one hump, that's normal distribution. And I think this camel with one hump is turning into one of those dromedaries that have two humps. And so like a lot of people are getting pushed to the back hump, and then a few people are getting pushed towards the upper hump. And what that gives you is this valley in the middle that are traditionally the support of any decently functioning capitalistic economy. For a capitalistic economy to coexist with democracy, by and large, you need the majority of your population to live in that middle hump.
Yep.
And if they don't, the system usually breaks down. I'm happy to elaborate as to why I think that is, and as to why the whatever the literature research says. But let's go back to the factors of why I think this is happening. I think part one has to do with for me, what I saw at Goldman sort of working on the back end of getting out of 08, 09 and super low interest rates. There was a team there that sort of specialized in lending money to very rich people. And so what you would see, so remember the following things. Congress passed Dodd-Frank. The Federal Reserve kept interest rates extra super duper low, so much so that, as you guys were mentioning, the prime rate for a mortgage was 3.25. At some point, it was actually 2.75, if I recall correctly. Free money, which, by the way, on the cash is trash. If you think about interest rates as the price of money, if something is very cheap, and if interest rates are low, then that means the price of money is cheap. So cash is trash at that point. That's why people were thinking in those terms. But back to this, Dodd-Frank, very little fiscal stimulus. Congress was being austere, and the Federal Reserve was being sort of expansionary. They were putting money out in the market, putting more liquidity on the market. The idea of putting liquidity on in the market is so that people who need financing will be able to access financing. But cope that with Dodd-Frank, which made capital requirements so intensive. And what you get is that banks are very unwilling to lend to the people who need the money the most.
Yep.
And then who gets access to all of this liquidity? The people who are already rich and already well off and already have assets. And so, you meet with your rich friends at the golf club and you're swinging and you're like, yeah, Goldman offered me this loan, or whoever offered me this loan at 3.5%. And guess what? The S&P 500, you don't even have to invest fancily. S&P long run average 5-6%, index passive, don't pay shit. So I'm borrowing at 3, I'm getting 5 almost for sure, and all I have to do is collateralize the loan with the same exact portfolio that I'm buying with the loan.
Yeah.
Yep.
Free friggin' money. Why? Because of a confluence of policies that frankly don't make sense when you put them together. It's one of those examples of like, you think you're doing a good thing when you look at it in isolation, but when you look at the three of them acting together, it makes no sense. At that point in time, my view is that they should have gone balls to the wall on the expansion, and Congress should have been fiscally stimulative too. Because the only way to get money to the bottom of the distribution is through fiscal stimulus. And I'm not talking helicopter money. I'm talking actual shit that the US could use. Build railroads, for Christ's sake. The tunnel that connects Amtrak between New York and the rest of the United States is worth 2% of the US GDP, and it's crumbling. It's crumbling. I don't know if you guys ever take Amtrak. I mean, I lived in DC for a long time, and I took the Amtrak into New York several times. And the amount of times that we were stuck before that tunnel because some kerfuffle. Because they were scared that if they put too many trains, like, it's just not operating where it should be operating. So when I say fiscal stimulus, I mean, do it smartly, right? Invest your money. Do some capex here. Stop doing
lowering business taxes is a fiscal stimulus.
It is
in a way.
No, it definitely is. It's just that you also have to. My job was as a fiscal economist, and so like you have to look at what has the most impact. And so what I'm saying is, sort of on a first order basis, what I think has the most impact on output, on getting money out there and getting us to work and getting GDP higher, is really like capex at this point. It may change from time to time. So losers, historically, inflation is terrible for poor people, terrible for the reasons that you guys were saying. The rich people are usually better able to hedge, but also because if you look at the components of inflation, the ones that have been most affected lately, the ones that are sort of sensitive, are items to which the poor people allocate the most money. Food, gas. You are sort of a blue collar, maybe even a little bit on the lower end of that blue collar distribution in California. You need a car, You need to drive around to get to your job, and you need to eat some food. And those things are getting massively expensive. And by the way, you allocate probably 85, 90% of the money that you make any given month to three things: rent, food, gas.
Just got a new gas car, which I'm thinking about right now.
Right. And so, like, when you look at your budget, but a rich person, how much of their income does a rich person have to allocate to this shit?
Like 5%, 10%.
Not
Very
much.
little.
Sincerely, not much.
10%.
So that's why inflation is so
Of income,
painful
yeah.
on the poorer rung. Like, again, gas, food, shelter. And with home prices where they are inaccessible, that also means that rents have gone up. I mean, I wanted to ask you guys about the rental market and how
we'll
you
talk
see it. But
about
to
that
me, it's just
definitely.
wild. So yeah, the poor people are the losers for many reasons. And if you allow me the sort of another zoom out, in the 70s and 80s, and I agree that those are good analogs. I've read also a lot about how in markets, and I can see the point that maybe we're more in an analog of the 2001 sort of dot-com bubble era, and that the recession was not as deep. It could be a combo of those two. I will agree with Hovig that, sort of a Great Depression scenario, I see it as unlikely. I will never discard any scenario. I will never say absolutely not, but I see it as unlikely. Because the confluence of factors at that point was, you're coming out of the biggest loss of life that humanity had ever seen. You're coming out of World War I. I think we have to remember that. I think we have to remember that the scramble for Africa was real. That all the that at the time the center of economic power in the world was Europe, and Europe was just devastated. So there was no demand coming out of there. And I think we tend to forget when we talk about U.S. economics that at the end of the day, the U.S. is also part of the world. And so, what aggregate demand looks like in China can ultimately affect the U.S. But the point I wanted to make, 70s, 80s, it was the largest wave of sovereign defaults in history. A full third of the countries in existence were in default during the 80s decade. And so I think if you look outwards a little bit, you look at a lot of countries with a lot of concern. And those, if you think the poor people are poor here, try looking at the poor people in a poor country like that.
I mean, even if you drive to Panorama City here, it's like I grew up in the Valley, so I have a weird hobby of going into different subsectors of LA. And I do that because I think LA has everything to offer, from extremely poor to very rich.
Yeah, it's a microcosm of the US for sure.
Yeah, I'll be back in a second.
Okay. So what I do is I just actually look at I go to Panorama City, right, and then I'll go out to Silmar, and then these are areas historically are undocumented workers. It's very hard to make a living. I mean, I discovered each quadrant of life through the real estate sector, and the reason why I'm saying we're going into a Great Depression aspect more so than just a recession / heavy recession is the two things that were similar is we had COVID, right? So they're like, oh, pandemic. I mean, early 1900s, we had a pandemic, the Spanish flu, right? So that's just whether it was as dramatic or not. I'm just saying the narrative is still there. They're like, oh, here's a topic. So I kind of looked at the similarities. Obviously, there's a huge difference in the, I guess, evolution of humanity, but at the same time, not really. We just wear nicer clothes and live in different buildings, but as humanity, we're still the same. So if there's enough famine, we'll all react the same way. If there's a shortage of something, we still all react to the same way. Yeah. So that's why I'm like, okay, like that's kind of the main aspect of it. But people, and it's funny because none of the media is really covering is no one's talking about the commercial mortgage-backed securities that are coming due next year. In 2018, I'm like, in my head, I was like, yeah, the residential mortgage, great. Everyone's talking about it. Oh, it can't go to 10 or 12. And I was like, guys, if the commercial mortgage-backed securities next year goes down the drain, and I'm telling you, it's not, I don't think, it's how catastrophic is it going to be, because the rates that they were getting debt on in 2018 that needs to be refinanced next year, minimum double. Your income on your commercial mortgage properties is down. They're saying statistically around 30-some%, right? So they're not doing any rent raises. You're having non-payment.
Where do you see occupancy I mean, and I think that LA is an extremely good market to gauge this.
Yeah.
I used to do CMBS, so some familiarity with this.
Yeah.
Where do you see occupancy rates for commercial real estate sort of in the post-COVID world? Is the telework revolution real? I have my thoughts about that. I don't think it is. I think it's bullshit.
I don't
But
believe it's
maybe.
real.
No. I mean, look, it's a more of a hybrid model.
Yeah.
And so
What model? Excuse me.
It's a hybrid model of the telecommunications world, where like
and sort of going to the question of what are commercial real estate occupancy rates going to look like, right? Like, because you have a lot of commercial buildings that were popped up.
I think we're going to be hovering in the 50% occupancy. And the reason why I think
very low.
Oh, I know. And here's the thing: if you looked at
what is it? What is the rate right now?
I mean, they're saying it's like a 9 across the United States. They're saying like it's like 94, 93. 92%.
What do you think it is?
I think it's going to be at 50% once the fat lady sing, whatever the fat guy or lady sings.
Hey, listen, it's an opera. It's an opera reference.
Exactly. No, I'm just joking. I actually like say it, and I also like to kind of take it back a little bit just to show how I can't say anything anymore.
I know, huh?
By the way, the name of the podcast is Unwoke Talks.
And I'm very sarcastic just because I just have a theory. I mean, if I'm very sarcastic and they get it, I can usually have a conversation, because they don't get offended, which is fine. But next year, when the commercial mortgage-backed securities don't get, the type of financing or thing, whatever they need to do to keep the party going, that's it, right? There's no way that the world has even seen the amount of damage it's going to do. Let's say FTX crumbles and, all the other, subsidiaries and other funds that are tied to them, which is, I would tell you, probably every single one is tied one way or another. Let's say this just only causes a small hiccup, which I don't think so. Next year, they're going to have to somehow find a way to repackage all this debt. And it's just not possible, because who's going to take on a debt where 5 years ago, your occupancy rate was 98, 99%. Your projections were, 10 to 12% growth if you can get them out, to now no one wants to touch a commercial building because nobody knows what this, telecommunication world did to it, where I'm a factor of everyone's going back to the office eventually, but there has to be a company to employ them to come back to the office. And what that means is if there's less money, there's less rent to be paid. Therefore, the valuations can't be that high because no one's going to pay that rent. So next year, I just don't think anyone's going to be able to refinance it. And once that happens, I think then we'll see how bad the market crashes after the commercial mortgage-backed securities are taken care of, which in my opinion, I don't think it will. So that's why my outlook on the crash is way worse, right? And that's why everyone's like, no, well, and then it always comes back to commercial real estate. So
let me raise the naysayer for a second and so maybe finish an idea that I had started before about why the double hump distribution, why the dromedary as opposed to the regular camel. So I mentioned the Dodd-Frank, austerity and low rates, but also, sort of the exportation, the outsourcing of a lot of sort of manufacturing and sort of the technological revolution, which, divided people who are productive in that world from the other one. So I just wanted to finish that idea. But, there's also a chance that the blowout in CMBS is not as bad because you can picture a world next year in which people start converting all of that into, say, housing. You get a massive program where, like cities like I've seen this happen in Washington, D.C., right? Like 2 new commercial buildings were sitting there empty, and sort of the city came in and talked to the owners. The owners were like, what if we convert it to apartments, which could ostensibly be like a low cost way to repurpose it. And that way we have more supply of housing, which is in dire need because the only real way to get housing costs down is by just having more housing. I think people have some very silly ideas about the ways to control housing prices. Like, let's put a cap on rents. It's like, oh, come on, get out of here with your craziness. That has never worked. Price ceilings don't work. But you can picture a world where we don't have a silver bullet, but you have a couple of different like interventions and maybe a little bit of luck. That's why I think since if you thought about sort of inventions or ideas as rolling the dice. If I roll the dice enough times and I get a marginal gain from each of them, maybe I stave off the worst of it. And maybe I'm not articulating this very well, but I think we still have time to do some of that. Employment is still, we added 260,000 jobs last month, and inflation seems to be tapering a little bit. I don't believe that it's going to fully taper. I think we're going to be hovering around 3-4%. I think that what the Fed funds is at 375 to 4 is the band right now. We're gonna move it. They're gonna move it almost for sure in December to 425 to 450, and I think they will have to do one last move at the very least to the 475 range. Even if it's 25 basis points, they're gonna have to do it. But my only point here being, I think that whatever the Fed could do about inflation, whatever you can do about inflation with interest rates sort of has been achieved, because a lot of the inflation that hasn't budged is supply side inflation. So you're a price taker for certain things like oil and sort of commodities and sometimes food. And so those things you can't really affect by raising interest rates. It's what you were saying earlier about desperation and nobody cares about their credit score when it's about food on the table. You're gonna buy food no matter what.
Yep.
That's why I don't necessarily see inflation coming down from the 3-4% range next year. Maybe they managed to put it down all the way to 4 or 5, but I don't know. It's a substantial chance that we stay on that sort of stubbornly higher inflation band.
I agree with what you're saying in terms of the inflation, because like you said, inflation is driven by there's a supply and demand. We don't have a shortage of demand right now. We have a shortage of supply. The gas prices are at extreme high, and yet you don't see the empty freeways here. Everybody's still driving. The food prices are extremely high, yet everybody's still buying. So there's a demand for that's for that reason, I think, like you said, the interest rates hike that the Fed started thinking they're gonna,
suppress
inflation. That's not going to have any effect on it. In fact, it's just going to have the opposite. That's why I think we will have some type of recession next year, but I don't think it's going to be depression.
For me, as a person who is speaking more in layman terms rather than lemon terms, like it feels like the things that I'm reading on the news with my inexperienced eye and sort of lack of education in economics, it feels like it's like band-aids on the severe head, like with the 270,000 jobs being added to the market and the rates are being raised, but nothing really. It's not that nothing really changes. You could see that nothing changes. Yeah. Everything goes worse every day. One of the points that I wanted to discuss right now is the gas and what is happening right now, because I totally don't understand what's going to happen with it, because it cannot go like. People cannot stop driving. Well, yeah. But ultimately, like not even in a pessimistic, I would say, from my perspective, I don't think it's a pessimistic way anymore of thinking anymore. Gas isn't. It's hard to afford gas now.
Yeah. Well, look, back to the job increase. Is if you look at the quality of jobs that were put back into the marketplace and how many second jobs were actually taken, the job growth was actually none. Right. And I think it was like the last couple, I'm going to make this wrong, 90 days, right? All the jobs that were increased were all second jobs. I think it was like 40-50% of it. So getting a second job, to me, that's not creating a new job. That's just desperation for the average individual to have to subsidize for the inflation or living costs to make it, break par, right? Eventually they're going to get tired and they're not going to, so it's a whole different thing. But the everyone keeps worrying about gas prices, which is going to be a problem. And obviously we're seeing a little bit of a low side now because we're using our reserves. Once the official midterm's over, I'm almost promising you that it's going to go back to where it was not that long ago. And we really got to focus on diesel prices. Diesel is going to be what is going to diesel is going to be what's going to show you how bad inflation is going to keep going.
Right, and because it's what's used for transportation.
Exactly.
So
that's why.
Feeds into the rest.
So diesel is what runs the world, and that's how I like to look at it. And if you look at, and I like to look at, I'd like just like the way I've always tried to understand it to where I can comprehend it and hopefully explain it is, okay, well, next year, if diesel's $10 a gallon and interest rates 14% for home prices or for, what do you call it? Primary residence. How does the world look? That's how, that's like the $1 million question, $1 billion, $1 trillion question. Next year, if diesel's $10 a gallon and interest rates 14%, how does the world look? Right?
How's it going to work?
Exactly. So that's the target I set out there. I was like, how is it going to look, and how exactly? It's the how, right? How is the world going to function, right? And I always like to look at the absolute worst case scenario and then absolute best case scenario, right? And I think we've went over that kind of hump to where we cannot go back to the best case scenario anymore. So I'm looking at, okay, and I leaned into this all year with my agents. You know, they're all 30, 40-year veterans. And I was like, hey, what are you going to do when rates are 8, 9% into this year? Right? Are you going to tap out? You're not going to sell? No, you're still going to sell. People still die. People still need a home, right? People still get a divorce. People still get dissolutions. People are going to have a demand to sell. So those 4 factors will always be. The question is, how are you going to trade in those factors? Same thing as you trade a stock, right? It's the stress factor now. It's going to get people to do certain things and make mistakes. But next year, I always say, what are you going to do? And this was my last kind of end of the year sales meeting, hoorah, which was much of a hoorah meeting, because I was like, next year rates go 12 to 14%. What are you going to do? Right. And then if you look at it from the real estate homeowner standpoint, it's an economic of like, okay, well, at 12, 14%. If I can ride this out, they're going to ride this out. But there's only a slim part of the population that could just be like, you know what? I've been meaning to take some time off. I have a couple million saved, and I'm just going to let this ride. Right? Very slim population. So the rest of it is, we work on the 80%, right? The 3% that are extremely wealthy, and then the 17% that can ride it out. The 80% is what's going to get affected. How are you going to service the 80%? And I look at the 80% as the entire world. What is your solution? Right. So the solution is, again, the 4 things that never change. You have to sell if you can't afford it. If you get a divorce, you still have to sell. If you have a partnership within as an investment, if it doesn't work, or you're fighting as a partnership, or if you're fighting, because whenever something happened within there, that's going to have to sell. Right. And somebody dies. When somebody dies, you have the capital gains, that one-time step-up basis. So those are still going to happen. The reason why I focus so much on the real estate side is real estate side controls, I would say, essentially, a third of the entire world, maybe more at this point. So when that's going on next year, it really just breaks down to how are people going to react in the worst case scenario, right? Everyone's like afraid of talking about the depressions. If you look at the depression in the early 1900s, a lot of people made a lot of money. A lot of people made huge leaps and bounds and made generational for 100 years of wealth. Right. So I'm always been like, lean into it, because if it's coming, like we're in the Titanic, the iceberg's there to hit the front. I mean, there's still people eating in the dining hall saying, there's no iceberg. It's fine. I mean, the water's on the floor, and they're like, it's fine. That's kind of the stage I think most people are at. And I've been the one who got off the boat on a little motorboat going, all right, where's this damn iceberg? All right. And then I come back, I'm like, guys, iceberg's here. And I'm like, whatever. And I'm just kind of like, it's okay to lean into it, because I think there's going to be policy changes, hopefully. And when we looked at the whole converting commercial into residential, right? It sounds good, but it only works if the city is revamped and saying, okay, well, we'll let you do whatever you want, and we'll not force you to pay us this much money for permits. But the problem is, most metropolitan cities tend to be blue, right? It's just usually what it is. Those cities
Currently,
yeah. Those cities make it very difficult because they do not protect the landlord. That is a number one problem in California, LA County in particular. If I had $50 million, right, and whatever, LA County says, we're going to lift our policies on how much you can build. I'd be like, well, the last 2 years, I have 50 buildings, half my tenants weren't paying, and you didn't let me evict them. Now I'm out the whole $5 million. I'm not going to put more money into this state. I'm going to go to a state that protects businesses. And that's the shift that I'm seeing. And again, I'm not trying to say red versus blue or whatever, Democrat versus Republican. It's
No, listen, you're talking about incentives.
It is the reality.
it's the reality of it.
Yeah.
So I don't like to
the incentive structure.
Yeah, it's the incentive structure. Correct. So some parties give certain incentives and some give the other. So I just kind of feel like once the actual policies change, you still have to convince the wealthy who are extremely smart not to leave. Right. So that's kind of where I'm kind of like stuck in thinking that it won't be as bad. Right. Because again, we're not even. Yeah.
Because government wanted the money to stay where they are.
Yeah. It would have to go back to the Reagan method where it's the supply side and lower taxes and stimulate businesses, and 36% in October. Commercial real estate tenants, 36% of them in October across the United States did not pay the rent. Not because they didn't want to, because they couldn't.
And a lot of people who've been leveraging that, by the way.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because they're like kind of financially educated.
Yeah.
On the commercial side, we're adding a commercial division in our company. So I've been talking to a lot of commercial banks, and this is what I'm hearing. I mean, it's in terms of the LTVs, they're being more conservative.
Yep.
And I think what you said in terms of 50% vacancy factor, I agree with that. Because especially here in California, like you said, again, unfortunately, our system is not geared right now towards capitalism.
Yeah.
It's geared more towards the criminals, the poor, the people who want to take advantage of the government,
freedom,
people who want to live off of the government handouts. And I mean, I don't say this in a negative way. It is what it is. It's just the reality. And unfortunately, the political system has been hypnotizing the population to accept that. That's my belief on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, and it's people use the word capitalism, and there has to be something called true capitalism, which is a fine line, but people don't want to define a capitalism that people understand today and true capitalism. And I think true capitalism is dead, right? It was there.
Yeah, it's hard to exist.
Correct.
Well,
because again, it's in its own fashion where true capitalism eventually will go into whatever capitalism works for the people who took advantage of true capitalism for decades.
Free market.
Yeah, free market. So, and just like the stock market, only very few people have access to free market or even understand what to do in the free market of the world. So now we're in this world where I would say states are catering to a power standpoint opposed to governing standpoint. They want power over the people in the sense that, oh, well, okay, here's $1,000 stimulus, like California's launched one out. I think it was for like whatever.
That's mind blowing. I still don't get it.
And to me, I was like, okay, you want, and that's what I'm saying. The policy is the problem. This is going from, obviously you guys can tell I'm not a fan of the Biden administration. I actually never, if you follow me, I'm very passionately against it. But, the whole problem is, okay, we're going to give 500,000 people $1,000. I mean, that could easily just be get rid of the gas tax from California for 4 or 5 months. Because what does that do? That increases productivity because it makes traveling cheaper, right? And if it makes traveling cheaper, right, and it eases the pain, then people will go out and try to do more.
That's capitalism.
JP, what's your opinion on that? Like,
so I guess Vasily knows that I'm a radical moderate.
Yeah,
I'm a radical moderate in the sense that I guess you could draw bounds between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, and I would sort of like live in that spectrum. I guess the Reaganomics is not necessarily something that I'm very faithful about. I think that there are better ways to do sort of fiscal stimuli that is not necessarily just cutting taxes, because I believe that the point of stimulus. So if you take it at the extremes, Reaganomics is trickle down. It says, if you let richer people do more, the money will trickle down to sort of the poorer people. I think that the direction of money naturally is such that if you give it to poor people, it's going to naturally flow more to the rich people. So that's where, if you take my sort of worldview very broadly and very broad brush, this is an oversimplification. I think that if those are your two choices, you're often better off doing the other one because you will benefit everyone. It's the tide that rises all boats. So I tend to be a little bit more socially liberal, quote unquote, than perhaps what Victor might be suggesting he is. My view is that, but yet I hear the argument of overregulation and sort of overly catering, overly trying to satisfy the population and essentially buying votes in a way.
Exactly.
I do think that, you know, democracy has its pros and cons. Every political system and every economic system has its pros and cons. And you know, that is one of the weaknesses of democracy, is that it gives incentives to the political class.
But also
to
democracy suggests
behave.
fluidity to that. Sorry for interrupting.
There should be. There should be.
Fluidity, which is not happening. That's why, from my point of view, that's
What do you
why
mean it's not happening? We just went from a Democratic president to Trump, back to a Democratic president,
Oh, no,
and
yeah, of
potentially
course.
to a Congress that is going to be controlled by the Republicans. I mean, if anything, the stalemate that you see in actions, not necessarily in the results of voting, but in actions, is ostensibly because the two parties that dominate the political landscape in the United States have let their edges pull them to polar opposites. But there used to be a little bit more overlap and a little bit more of a common understanding of what the heck this project of the United States of America was. I just think that they've become a lot more rivals than adversaries, if that distinction makes any sense to you, right? Like
It does.
a rival is somebody that you don't want to work with. An adversary is somebody that I hop on the rugby field with, and I know that they're going to hit me hard, and they know that I'm going to hit them hard. But when we're done, we go out and drink beers. Right. And there are some things that we can agree on, such as the rules of the goddamn game. And I'm not going to try to go for their heads. So that's the distinction I'm drawing here as to why I think the political system is grinding to a halt. I think a lot of the unwritten rules are being disrespected. And there was one more point, but I think it escaped my mind by now on what Victor was saying, which I found wildly. True capitalism. I like that you brought that up, because to me it's reminiscent of the exact mirror image. I get into this conversation very, very often with people who think that they're communists. And so they will tell me something like, but true communism has never been tried. And I go, oh,
I'd like some pictures and names.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Let's bring them on
you
here.
know,
Oh,
again,
well,
just
trust me.
I'm gonna again just like double down on my point that I'm a radical moderate. So just as fervently as I have to argue against the true communism, I will give you some points as to why true capitalism is. And I'm understanding what you're describing as true capitalism to be sort of the original theoretical laissez-faire,
Yep.
sort of championed by a particular French minister of finance in the 1600s.
Yep.
True capitalism, unfettered sort of free marketeering, does not take into account at all sort of initial endowments of people, and it can tend to perpetuate things that we don't like from a moral standpoint. Like people who believe in capitalism often believe in it because and I count myself among this, we believe in meritocracy. You want to know, maybe not that you have a perfectly fair shake at it, but that you have a shake. And that's what we despise so much from the other side. That the other side is completely predetermined, and it's just someone telling you, no, you must do this because the state needs you to do this, and the extreme centralization of power. So to me, it all boils down, if you want me to boil it down to one factor, is I will advocate against anything that necessitates centralization of power. And, sort of true laissez-faireism at its extreme leads to the centralization of power, and frankly, to ugly outcomes. So we have to moderate and regulate it. And that is why most of the advanced world lives from the floor of capitalism. So you were talking about the ceiling of capitalism, which is all of the capitalism things that you could do. I think about it from the lens of, okay, how do I build from the baseline of capitalism, which is respecting property rights? That is it. If you were to define, capitalism in one phrase, it's respect for property rights, for private property. And then how do you build up from that? And how much do you not allow from that? But and just to put this on the table as well, just major difference between, say, China and the US, which both have some sort of style of capitalism at this point, really, is the presumption of freedom versus the presumption of prohibited, right? Like in China, everything is prohibited until made legal. In the
Yep.
US, everything is allowed until made illegal. That is a very different departure point to come out from. But I will just cap this by saying, true capitalism is, to me, almost as unpalatable, true, like very extreme laissez-faire, almost, not necessarily equally unpalatable, but almost as like true communism.
I mean, look, I guess going on that, I studied I guess China pretty heavily since like, I don't know, 2014, 15.
Well, let's get into that because China is one of the topics.
Yeah. So, it's like the reason why I'm so focused on capitalism and true capitalism, true communism and communism, because to me now I can see when you go into China, people have boundaries, they have rules, which is set by the government, right? So there is a sense of chain there, right? There's a limitation of what somebody can do, and there's a societal rule, right? And I'm not a fan of that. However, the more, maybe this has always been a thing, and I just haven't been alive long enough. And that's what I like to equate myself a lot of this to. I'm like, maybe I just haven't been alive long enough. But in the United States, and I would still obviously live here over China. I should live here over Korea. It's just a lot of different things.
Which one?
I live here.
And I think he voted.
It doesn't matter. I should live here regardless.
He voted.
There we go.
Huh?
He voted with his feet on that one. I think.
Yeah, exactly.
He's here.
And in the United States, they say you're free because you have capitalism. But then, if you look at it, the system that you're going into growing up, it's not true capitalism, because again, like to your point, people in society here, as on a macro scale, come in to the playing field with a huge advantage. And I'm not saying you can't get ahead, but like we were saying, like the Dodd-Frank, there was like a fractional banking system created just for the wealthy. Essentially, that's the easiest way I can put it. They just gave more money to them. Oh, you have 100,000 here, we'll give you $1 million loan, $10 million, whatever, right? But the United States is now become to a point where they're like, oh, you're free, but you're really not, right? Because the chances of you, and we're not as bad as other European countries where, you're born into the trade, you die in the trade. The amount of things now that go against you because of regulations and rules, it's almost impossible to make it to the, I'm not saying middle class or upper middle class, but to the absolute elite. Yep. Mm-hmm. To the top 3%. And I consider top 3% as in, $100 million and up, right? Give or take, right? Because in that world, now you're in what we call your own capitalistic world. Now, that's your world you create. So now it's like, I'm like, I like to just kind of look at my day to day because I get to interact with people that are very wealthy and then very poor, right? And when I interact with people that are on the, a little more financially challenged, they're like, oh, at least I'm free. I'm like, well, are you free? I don't tell them that. I go, are you free? I mean, if you don't work, you don't really have medical care and you're taxed out the roof, yet you haven't lived in a better situation in the last 20 years. So how free are you? And I'm talking about people that work hard. Right. I'm not talking about the ones that just like, all right, check in, check out. They actually work hard. They look for jobs. So there has been this kind of like this corruption of whatever this world that America has created. And I genuinely feel bad because I would like to consider myself the smartest shortcutter out there. Does that make sense? In other words, I'm really lazy. Right. I like to do as little as I possibly can for the most result. But when I see that model,
when you study economics at the graduate level, you are what we would call the rational actor.
Exactly.
You are that little thing that I have to imagine and model in microeconomics problem sets. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm the
study.
I'm not into statistics. There's like how I look at doesn't make sense. But when I do see that one thing work and I see it makes multiples, I will live and breathe it and I will do it till I die, till my fingers bleed. But it's just looking at it, I feel so bad because I look at my parents, my grandparents, they came from other countries. with essentially nothing. And if you look at my entire family and this just, like the culturally within my friends and their parents from all immigrant families, most of them really, they came here to avoid, communism and socialism, but they came here and now they're trapped in this kind of mindset that they're like, oh, you're free to do whatever you want. Right. And it becomes this thing where now their honeypot that they had buying homes, building wealth, it's not there for our generation anymore.
No.
Right. Because real estate, you buy, like in 2020, 19, 20, 21, if you bought in those 3 years, never going to get it back.
Yeah.
Whatever, if you did 20%, 30%, up to 40%, your equity that you saved, all gone.
And ostensibly, if you bought in 2020, 2021, the same thing is going to be true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're now a renter, right? And your landlord's the government. That's it.
Well,
right?
if it's Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Well,
I mean, to add to your point, I mean, it is, and your point too. I mean, it is. There was a word I like to use, but I don't want to use it here. I mean, when you get up in the morning and you're rushing yourself to work and you're going to clock in and clock out at certain time, you're not free.
Oh, you're in jail.
It's like
you're more than in jail, but I think you have a better days in jail than but you're not free. And then when you start the day with let's say we mentioned breakfast, then you have to fill your gas. Every step, everything you touch, you're taxed.
Yep.
You're not free, and people are controlling your life. So that's we don't have freedom here. I mean, especially right now with this technological world. I mean, everywhere we walk, there's cameras. We are being recorded. From that perspective, yeah. I mean, capitalism right now here, especially in California, we have, for capitalism to work in a society, there's two extremes. There's like, the true capitalism and then the communism. We need to be somewhere here, more than in the middle, like, towards a little bit to the capitalism level. Right now, we don't have that, especially here in California.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, and then, like I said earlier, and the government is hypnotizing and controlling and using the people's intelligence level to keep them at a certain level, on purpose. I mean, think about, I'm a big negative. I'm not a fan of lottery system, for example. I don't buy the lotto. I don't buy lottery. I mean, think about how much money people are putting into lottery system every day, every week, every month. These people are, they're filing their taxes, and they're, rather than reporting 20,000 income, they're reporting 19,500, thinking, ooh, they're smart, they're screwing the government or something, but yet they're going willingly paying cash money to buy lottery tickets. They're paying their actual cash money to the government, thinking that they're going to win something, or worse yet, think that some of that money is helping the government to build some other stuff. Supposedly it goes to our schools in California. And I don't know about you, if you walk around and see our school situation here in California, they're worse. The buildings, I think they're worse than the third world country buildings. I mean,
that is true. I'm from there.
I mean,
it's true.
I think some African nations have better school buildings 100%. Than we have especially in San Francisco. I mean, everywhere. So yeah, there is no true capitalism, unfortunately.
Well, so like to go on to that lottery thing, right? And when I was seeing this craze of the lottery, I finally understood why the lottery was so sensationalized recently, or in the most recent years, is because the true American dream, I'd say, died with the 2000s, maybe early 2000s. I think the
why
true,
so?
Just it's affordability. Right. So money got printed just insanely, and it didn't go to everybody. It just went to a certain population. So, if you make 100,000 now, trying to live and buy a home, have a family, it's impossible, right, in California. The reason why I finally understood the lottery system is everyone understood that the American dream is essentially dead as a whole. And I'm not trying to be so morbid about it. As a whole, it's dead because buying a home at 24, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, wife, 2.5 kids and a dog, not possible, right? For the most 25-year-old. The reason why the lottery was so sensationalized, and I finally understood it this time around, is because they literally made that into, here is your only chance to participate in the American dream, is if you buy this lottery ticket and we'll make one lucky winner, one of us, which is the American dream, which we killed in the last 40, 50 years. Obviously years before I was even here. So I finally realized why so many things everyone is taking a gamble on is because they know that, they might not notice it, but make $100,000 a year, you get taxed, you take home single 65, whatever, 70, if you're lucky.
70, yeah.
65, 70, and you realize that doesn't really get you anywhere, right? And only very few percentage of people can take the social beating of not leasing the car, living in a certain lifestyle, renting a room, having roommates, even if you're making 6 figures in order to get ahead, because that's what it takes. They want to have a place that's nice, lease a car, and that's just what it is. We all kind of fall into the honeypot. So then they go into other things that are for short-term dopamine. You go out, so you go drinking. And I always found the bar scene so fascinating, right? It's because people go because they just need a break. And the whole happy hour thing, I was like, it's genius, right? So they create a life that's so hard to live where you have to go somewhere to find relief, which is in alcohol. And it's a cultural norm almost in every world now,
country, yeah.
Right? But I think US is the worst. If you go to other countries, they actually go drink to celebrate. You actually drink here to relieve stress. And so, and it's even, I've seen it in the Korean culture. It used to be where you would drink, and there's only one I can and even in the Hispanic culture, and, you used to drink to celebrate. Now it's like, God, I need a beer.
Habitual, yeah.
Or I need a drink. And that is where I was like, wow, they created the perfect system. Work everybody like a horse, give them some medication, which was, a little bit of success, celebration, and create small businesses around it. But that was it. So that's kind of where I'm like, that's why I keep saying something has got to give, right? I always say, have macro emotions, meaning don't have emotions on your macro part of life, but have micro compassion. So I always try to look around people and be like, okay, are they suffering or are they happy? Right. And it's really hard nowadays to see people genuinely happy. And it's sad because 5 years ago, I could tell you people were happy. 8 years ago, people were happy. When I went to college, kids were happy. Now kids are miserable. I went drove by a college and I literally, sound weird, I walked around Seaside. I just walked, right? Because it wasn't that long ago that I was in college. Kids, it was just like the way kids were walking. They weren't looking at each other. They were looking on their phone. They were sitting there. They were all sitting by themselves.
There's more dopamine there, yeah.
They were all sitting by themselves around trees. And I was like, what is going on? Right? So that's what I mean by something has to give, because this kind of environment that we're in right now, and this all ties to the financial sector, it stresses the entire world except for the, a couple percent. And, and I'm not blaming the 3% of the world, right? I'm blaming the policies that should have, when the money was printed, it should have truly went into stimulating the economy. That's the only thing. All right.
Which was my earlier point.
Yeah, that's why when you said that.
If you had made government financing easier, but then you had, because that's what you do when you print money, right? You're basically like floating the government. It's a Federal Reserve floating government at the end of the day. But if you had used that for fiscal stimulus, pointed at the right places, which there's no lack of capacity. There's no lack of capacity.
Unfortunately, they're making the second mistake by increasing the rate, thinking that they're going to overcome that mistake
Well, I
from the
have to
past.
say, I'm going to go on the record saying that I do think that the Federal Reserve is doing the right thing in raising interest rates now.
100%.
I don't think that they have any other option. And
It's
frankly,
No,
definitely
they're
not a
responsible.
wrong decision.
They don't have any other option, but it's not going to help the economy with their actions.
But they're
That's
doing
the
he's
thing.
he's doing it on
So,
purpose
yeah.
to kill the housing market,
Yeah.
which has to happen.
They have to kill some demand to kill
Yep.
inflation.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
when
And
you're
that's the
between
first
two
market
evils,
it's gonna go.
It's
there's a
kind of
fantasy. There's a fantasy with the Federal Reserve that it has a dual mandate. You know, employment, inflation. The reality of the survival. If you look at the interest of a central bank, just think of any generic central bank, and most central banks have one mandate: price stability, inflation.
Yep.
The only outlier that I'm aware of, and maybe I'm not aware of all of them, but the only outlier that I'm aware of is the Federal Reserve that has a supposed dual mandate. But when push comes to shove, the one that commands attention is inflation. Why? Because it threatens the very survival of the institution. If you lose the battle on inflation, you lose your credibility. The only real asset you have as a central bank is your credibility.
Yep.
So at this point, it's all or nothing. And, you know, this is what Volcker did and it worked. And I hear your point, Hovig, that, you know, it's not helping the economy in the immediate sense,
Yeah.
but it's about sort of
It's
helping
helping them-
stabilize it for the
Right.
mid run.
Yeah,
It's
for the
it's gonna take us to recession. That's for sure. Next year or so.
Even if it's a mild one. And I
Yes.
think
Uh-huh.
we're all hoping it's going to be a mild, sort of I call it an
I'm hoping
adjustment.
it's gonna be a mild one too. I mean, Victor Victor thinks it's
Victor
gonna be
Victor is
horrible.
also hoping it's a mild one.
I'm
He's just
hoping it's
concerned
mild.
that it's going to be
Well,
a massive one.
Yeah, oh my
He's concerned.
everything.
We changed Victor's point of view. already.
So
I still
Vasily,
hope it's
I'm
mild.
gonna have to leave in a few minutes. So
yes, thank you very much.
if
I wanted to
there's
apologize
any,
for keeping you for that long.
no,
but
that I've
was-
enjoyed this. I've enjoyed this thoroughly. But if you have any additional point that you especially want me to weigh in on, please tell me now or
We'll
put it
get
on the table now so we can discuss it.
Yeah,
Awesome.
we'll get on the next call. I'll be doing this hopefully twice a month, and like whenever you're
Alright.
available, I'd be
Yeah.
glad to get you on a
Yeah,
call.
no, it's been a
And
real
hopefully
pleasure.
I'll see you like in a couple months. I'll come
Let
by.
me know. Let me know when you're in the Northeast.
I will.
All of you. All of you.
Yeah.
Whereabouts are you, JP?
I'm in Boston right now.
Boston.
Recently
Yeah.
Harvard graduate.
Congrats.
Not a
Well,
graduate
almost.
yet. I'm graduating in 24.
Well, you
Okay,
got
that
in,
is
so
awesome.
that's
That's my version of the American dream. I was gonna
Yeah.
say, like, you know, when people say the American dream is dead, I take a little bit of issue with that. I recognize that it's been diminished. I recognize that it's
Yeah.
been diminished, but and that it's less probable, but it's there.
Yeah.
And I always take a relativist point of view in the sense that the reason that people still keep trying to migrate here is because
There's still
well,
something.
Yeah.
the dream is here. It's perhaps
It's
no
alive,
other
yeah.
place.
yeah.
Exactly.
And
I didn't literally
just-
mean dead. Sorry. I just say that to make it
Oh no,
more
no,
impactful.
I know, absolutely. It's
But
a
for the
dramatization,
listeners, it'd be
dramatization.
good to hear.
Yeah, it's good to hear.
Yeah, but
No,
I do believe that the American dream is alive. It's diminished. It's you know, it's taken a beating, but it's there, and that's what wakes us up in the morning. And I know that maybe it feels like there's no absolute freedom, but you know, the philosopher Hobbes once said that in the absence of institutions, meaning government, life would be nasty, brutish, and short.
Yep,
And if
that's
you
true.
take the
Chaos.
view that nasty, brutish, and short is absolute freedom, is that what you want, or do you want what we have here, which is, as was stated by the Supreme Court in one opinion, I cannot remember which one it was. What we have is a system of ordered liberties, and so I guess you could think of taxes as the price that you pay for civilization
Right.
from time to
I
time.
agree with that. Yeah.
So yeah, those are my concluding thoughts.
Thank you so much.
guys.
That was great.
All right.
All right,
Thank
later,
you.
man.
See ya.
So coming back to I hope you enjoyed JP on the
Oh,
call.
Yeah,
He's
he's
smart.
he was awesome. Yeah. Good
Yes.
thoughts.
So coming back to sort of my job, this is our like final part because unfortunately it's only 3 hours, but it's already been what 2 hours.
2 hours.
So coming back to things that I would share, like I would make content and make shorts out of it, and I would like to get some advices from people like you. What are the steps right now that people should be taking, in your opinion, especially in the middle class, or the people who are coming from the poor from the lowest to the middle class at the moment, not knowing anything about what's happening, who are not having the fixed jobs, because fixed jobs, like I would say, like they're helpless until they realize how fucked they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Good.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So, I mean, I always tell people only worry about things you can control. Right? And then when you go into things you can control, it's very little things you can control. So in theory, right? In theory, you're only going to worry about little things, right? Very, very little things. So I always tell them, worry about what you can control. And then you realize you really can't control much. The only thing you can control is how you react to the said opposition or challenge. And if we're actually speaking from challenges from the real estate standpoint, right, or maybe just income from a business owner, right, or just trying to go through the recession, is find and it's funny because I've been saying this for almost 3 or 4 years. Find the difference in your life on what you need and what you want. That's it. So, do you need to spend this money on whatever dinners, right? This is a $200 dinner for 2 times a week, right? Do you need it? No. Right? Do you want it? Of course. Do you? And so as you kind of go through your
think long term,
right? So think as you're going through your balance sheet, everyone has their own balance sheet. You realize that you can probably do without 30% of that expense. And this is like across the board. I don't care how wealthy or how middle class or how poor. About 30% you can get rid of. Now the extreme poor, they're literally already forced to do that. So once you kind of pull open your balance sheet for the last year, right? And if you just say, hey, I'm going to make 30-40% less this coming year, it's going to happen. But if you take 30-40% of your expense away, right, that are not fixed, you're fine. Now that stress goes away. Now, when the stress is gone, you can take a different mindset and approach to, okay, now I'm not stressed. How do I go make money again? Right. And then I always, find out all the things that transact. The demand is people that have to sell, right? And just finding these trends, the last sales meeting that I did, I said, hey guys, easiest way to strum up business as a realtor, right? This is how I did it when I got in. I went to Craigslist and I looked at all the homes for rent, homes. And at that time I did apartments. So I went to apartment rentals because small building owners, what they do is they rent their own units. So they would put their cell phone number on there. So I'd call them and say, hey, I know you're trying to rent this out, blah, blah, blah. I know you may not want to sell, but I have somebody who wants to make an offer on a, $2 million building in this zip code. Chances are no, right? But it starts a conversation.
Until it's a yes, yeah.
Until it's yes. So then that's the next thing. But residential, it's a little bit easier because they want to rent a home, right? You have a lot more offer to a single homeowner who has one rental, because their experience typically is not as experienced as somebody who owns a bunch of commercial assets. So I told them, go into your local Craigslist, like type in your zip code, whatever, look up all the homes for rent, call every single one of them. Say, hey, so you're trying to lease this out. It's a tough market to lease. Let me help you. Boom.
That's interesting advice.
But it's just like little nooks, and you just got to get creative, right? And nobody thought of that in the office, because they all looked at me. They're like, oh, well, why would you go to Craigslist? Because they're not trying to sell. And I'm like, no. You're not trying to get people to sell. And like, to your point, right? People are stressed. So when they're stressed, they need a solution.
Safety net.
Yeah. But safety net is a solution. If you give them a solution, they feel safe, right? So I say you need for them to feel safe. So you're going to give them a solution. I'll help you lease this out. But while you're helping them lease it out, you now get to meet with them, understand their financials, understand their goals, right? Maybe their financials and goals are not in line with what they're trying to get, and they're trying to hit a target that isn't even there. So, now you get to go sit with them, you can talk to them and say, hey, look, are you actually, happy with this property? Because you want to rent it for this home for $5,000 a month in Woodland Hills or whatever. You're not going to get $5,000. It's $4,000. They go, oh, if I get it for $4,000, I'm breaking even. I don't get a cash flow. Okay, well, let me ask you. If I can get you cash flow, would you exchange this into another home? We're like, oh, well, I never thought about that. Well, you're technically not selling. You're just moving equity to another asset.
That's a very multi-step game.
It is, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
And you do that every day. It's eventually you're going to have, hundreds of people that you're talking to that are just kind of like, You
You
know,
don't
the,
need, yeah, you need 10
the
out of
beauty
100.
to cold calling is coming back.
Yeah.
Because they didn't need it for a long time.
Right.
You know, so
So I mean, I'm with Victor too. I mean, it's my biggest thing is do not overextend yourself, and especially in a situation like this, knowing right now where the market is going to go, we know it's going to go to recession. Whether it's going to be mild one or a crazy one, that we don't know.
By the way,
But-
could you please also elaborate on how the recession would look like on the for like in daily life of a regular person who's not involved in the economics or anything? Like what
Okay,
specifically?
recession is going to be, for example, the way it's going to people is going to lose their jobs. They're going to their income is going to go lower. For example, if they're working 40 hours now, their employer says, you know, I can only afford to pay you for 20 hours of job, so they're going to have less income.
Mhm.
They're going to have their expenses are going their fixed expenses are going to be there. They're stuck with it. So their cars, for example, if they've lost their job, then they'll either have to sell their car if they can, if there's a market for it at that point, or the car has to be repossessed. They have to give it back. You know, their credit is going to be damaged. There's a lot of negative factors starts from the recession. So the main thing is employment. You know, lack of cash. I mean, their people's credit cards going to start increasing, just like we were saying. You know,
Yep.
I think going forward, we're going to see credit card spending increase exponentially.
Yeah.
You know, so I think come early, I mean, first or even second, I would say second quarter of next week, the credit card, and it's a good idea. I think I should look into this.
Second quarter of the next year.
I mean, next year, yes. The credit card debt, it's going to be, I think, double than what it is today. So, I mean,
Yeah.
those are some of the factors affecting the consumer. I mean, they're going to, of course.
Meaning people there are a lot of people who are already there. There's more people coming in.
Oh yeah, there's.
Oh, yeah.
This is just we are just the start.
Beginning.
We've hit the iceberg, as
Mhm.
Victor
Yeah.
said. A lot of people, unfortunately, are being ignorant. They're still sitting in the dining room, you know, drinking their wines and driving their Mercedes, and so
I took that personally.
no, don't no, sorry. But yeah, people are not looking at it from that perspective, unfortunately. So it's in order to come back to the previous, I think don't ever overextend yourself. You know, cash is king. Stay on the sidelines. There's opportunity going to be presented to you. Is this recession going to be an opportunity for you, or it's going to be a catastrophe for you? I think only you can decide
Mhm.
based on your actions and decisions of today.
Yeah, the easiest like example that I tell people is if you're going from a normal market to a recession, just imagine walking around with a 25-pound vest every day, all day. It doesn't seem like a lot for the first like 10 minutes, but like 3 hours in, go to work with a 25-pound vest on, drive the car, walk, go try to play whatever sport you play. It's severely harder.
Right.
Right.
Right. And to add another point, I mean, when people are stressed, they tend to make
Wrong
different
decision.
decisions, the
Yeah.
wrong decisions. When people are out of stress,
Yep.
I like to see the balance sheet really clean because everybody has a different perspective. For me, I don't like credit cards. I don't like to have debts. So the less debt I have, the less stressed I am, and the better decisions I make in
Yeah.
every area of life, especially financial decisions.
Yeah.
So, and again, I think that's normal. That's in general for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, most people, if you're stressed out, it just, you know, it's you're gonna make the wrong decisions. Again, we're coming back to the word desperate. They're going forward the next 6 months to 12 months. I think the desperation level is going to go higher and higher and higher. So
Yeah.
I'm very optimistic to it. Like even like I'm sort of a follower of Joe Rogan. Sorry about that. Like bad times create strong men create weak.
100%.
Yeah. So like right now we are at the dusk of good times, I would say. At least
Yeah.
we see it. And yeah, the times that will make us tougher are not so far from here. But the next question is what is the best and the worst investment right now, time wise, money wise, for younger generations like 18 to 25, 18 to 30?
Best investment right now is to sit on your cash.
Mhm.
Uh, Gold could be an opportunity in the coming months. From my perspective, if you have a lot of money, let's say a million or two or three or and up, even half $1 million, it's always a good idea to take advantage of the bond market currently.
Mhm.
So that's you could just take that into effect consideration, because you know your money, it's going to be making some returns. If you can get 5% return, it's still better than nothing.
Yeah.
And you're balancing out the inflation effect, and you have your cash money sitting there for you. So, and it's ready for you when
For that to utilize.
the opportunity comes. So cash, bond, and gold.
Victor?
Well, so by the question you're asking, 18 to 24, 18 to 30, are you referring to kids or whatever adults that are not financially secure and there's
Are not
worry?
financially secure.
Not.
Oh, not
Oh,
financially
so
secure.
look,
Both, because that, like, you already
Yeah,
answered
we're gonna-
that question.
So, the 18 to 30, I would say, is just kind of take your ego out of whatever you've maybe learned or has been there. Just make sure your time is being used at least to just provide some sort of income, right? This whole have one job and go home and enjoy your nights, right? I think it was a new thing, or maybe it was around, but I didn't. I grew up with certain financial challenges within the family household that
Mhm.
I was forced to work early, and two jobs was like a normal thing. It was it showed hard work, and it really didn't show anything else. Now it's like if you work one job and you have to have a second job, people are like, oh, why is your first job not paying you enough? It's like, yeah, it's not paying me enough. Or even if it's paying me enough, I don't care to, participate in regular things that normal people do at night. Right. So I would just say, whatever you're doing, just put savings away. Like I know it's gonna be extremely hard to save now, but that's why I say look into your balance sheet. Look into how much money you're saving on very simple stuff. The fact that people are so in debt and so out of cash because they spend $6 on coffee a day is like absolutely insane. Right. And I'm looking at this from like, it wasn't that long ago. I'm 34. I just turned 34 this year. And I still feel like I'm in college. Right. And I remember like I budgeted, like I set extreme budgets. Right. So set extreme budgets. So
And follow them and stick to
follow
them.
them, because even if you miss the extreme budget, it's not that big of a deal. My whole thing was I'm not going to spend more than $15 of food a day. Obviously back then food was cheaper, but back then 15 a day was still not a lot. So the most I can spend for breakfast, lunch, and dinner was 5 apiece. So I just wouldn't eat breakfast, right? And then I would eat lunch, dinner, right? And at that time, a foot long was still $5, right? But when even things got expensive or I wanted something different, I go to like Costco, and then I'd prorate what a Costco membership was in a month. And I'd be like, okay, if I go buy the whole chicken, $5, that lasts me maybe a day, 2 days, right? So then I can start portioning up. Was it extreme? Yeah. Was it fun? No. But that was the only time where I realized I was able to save a little more money with a very, not a high intelligent job, right? But I was a server for 6 years, right? I loved it, right? But there's only so much you can save, right? So it's just little stuff. It's just you got to learn to like just trim off the fat. That's all it is. So, but investing in stuff, I say don't invest in stuff if you have absolutely no idea what you're doing.
Exactly.
Great advice.
That's also why I'm like, just don't like, this whole crypto phenomenon. I was just mind blown because people that were, had 10,000 in crypto would tell me, oh, you need to invest in crypto. I was like, well, how much you have in crypto? And like, oh, I got about 10 grand. I was like,
That's investment.
yeah, I was like, that's so came to that. So
Yeah. Next question. Top 3 books that you would advise to read at the current time for anybody, as well, out of what you've read.
I mean, one of the top 3, The Magic of Thinking Big. It's by, I believe it's David Schultz. Think and Grow Rich. That's I think everybody should read
Napoleon
that book
Hill.
by
Yep.
Napoleon Hill. And one of my favorite authors is I don't read nonfiction, so I only read self-help books and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So that's all I know. Og Mandino, the greatest salesman in the world, and he's got a bunch of other books too. So, and then I could add one more thing, and it's free. Um, it's done by Kevin Trudeau. If you get over the fact that he is in jail right now and listen to his
Great. Yeah, I've listened to it.
he's got a program, and you could find it on YouTube. It's called Your Wish is Your Command. Exceptionally well programmed. I think every person should hear that 1,000 times over and over again. And that's one of the things I listen to on a daily basis on the way to work, on the way back to home. So it's, again, like I said, it's free. It's got a lot of stuff in there that people would charge thousands of dollars for it. So those are the
Victor.
Man. So so I'm the guy that buys, like, I want to find the manual, right, for it to work, whatever. And I've done this as a kid. I can tell you, I can count on two hands how many books I've actually finished. I've bought every single one. The Think and Grow, which was great. It was better for me on a podcast. I mean, on an audiobook.
Mhm.
I just don't have the ability to sit and read. It's always been a struggle for me. But when the audiobook came about, I was able to blow through so many books. So my recommendation wouldn't be to go look for a book to read, is to go find somebody. It has to be older, right? And they could be equally as successful as somebody who's older, but somebody who's older, I don't care what they say, they've lived through life more. So go find somebody that you can be indebted to, that would give you their time in exchange for whatever you can help them with. And that's what I was taught. Go find somebody, and it's going to be a search. It's not going to come easy. But go find somebody who's done something or is living a kind of life you would hope to live or potentially live, and just go look for it. Right. And it's going to be, you're going to have to get creative, right? You can run into him at the gym. At one point in my life, it was somebody I worked out who was a peer, and he was 15 years older than I was. Right. And unfortunately, after 5 years, I disposed of him. Not so, but in my mind, he was not who I wanted to be anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But he helped through so many certain things that I was looking for in life. Right. And instead of books, for me, it's always been audio. Right. So I look at motivational stories, not so much anymore, because it's such a theater now.
It is extremely very much a theater right
So
now, unfortunately.
Success.
Oh, it's just it makes me want to vomit when I
Yeah,
hear this
and
stuff
that's
now.
why I don't buy those books. I don't buy those
Exactly.
programs anymore.
Yep.
Because
it used to be where you go back to look at the maybe like 2000s, right? Where video was like you get the raw footage of them actually motivating the room, right? Those are the ones that I tell you to go watch, right? True Hardship, right? And then you're going to watch all of them, right? I say go watch every inspirational movie. I mean, every inspirational story out there through book or through YouTube. YouTube has been my savior, right? Even as a kid. And I did it on SoundCloud back then when, YouTube really didn't have that.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to it, and you're going to find at least one thing from each person. And if you listen to 100 of them, you're going to find 100 things. And I truly believe in that process, you're going to find something. Well, at least for me, it was more inspirational to see that it was already in action than some guy who wrote a book, because I'm a salesman. So when I buy the book, I'm like, oh, this book's trying to sell me on something. And I can't get that out of my head.
Right.
So that's been my biggest struggle for me. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of books that I was like, wow, this is great. Right. But when I hear the story, like Tony Robbins used to be great. His original stuff,
it was great.
It was like, wow, like this is something.
I didn't even hear his original stuff.
Like his original, where it was so raw, right? But the problem with motivational speakers is all the motivation is the same. It's challenge and overcoming, right? So once you give your challenge and overcoming,
Yeah, there's only so
that's
much
it.
to sell. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't keep selling it. And at that point, it's like, what are you selling? So I that's where I would say look for like raw footage. If you go onto YouTube and it's like there's like a nice photo on it, don't watch it. Right? If it's like like a video VCR recording and
That's
it's
the
like
one.
somebody like used their phone to record, that's the one you watch. Because I promise you, you're gonna watch it and you're gonna get that chill down your spine, right? And then you're gonna be motivated. And it just might be motivation for like a day, which is fine. That's all you need. Right. And then it's next day, you might be running off that motivation. And then you might, fall off a week later. But that's eventually when you're finding enough motivation, you don't need it anymore because you realize it's just got to be consistent.
The word is consistent, and,
Yeah.
and to be aware of your actions on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
And so if you're depressed, you could motivate yourself. But that's you have to be aware.
Yeah, you have to consistently motivate yourself to not stay in that state of depression, right? And that's why I always tell people just listen to it, because I'm a firm believer how your body reacts to something you hear, and then something you read. I think it does something different to your
of course.
So everybody who lived through it knows this. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I always say listen to tapes or whatever, just because when people go through. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Just find somebody that will mentor you, right?
Which is part of what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm looking like I'm bringing people who are smarter than me. Thank you very much, guys.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having us.
This is the first part, hopefully not the last one. I'll be doing this several times. I hope you guys will join us on on one of the next ones. There's a lot of topics to discuss because politics is one of the. So I wanted to dive deep on the politics one because there's a very interesting opinions on that. And thank you so much, and hopefully, thank you guys, thank you folks. Till the next time.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.